My name is Delia Marsh. I am 33 years old. And the night my sister stood up at my parents' dinner table and told everyone I had wasted my life, I sat very still and let her finish every word because I already knew something she did not. I want to tell you this story carefully, not because the facts are hard to follow, they are not, but because the version of this that feels satisfying on the surface is not the whole truth, and the whole truth is more worth telling. The whole truth is about what it costs to be quiet for a long time inside a family that reads your silence as confirmation of their worst assumptions about you. It is about the specific exhaustion of being misread repeatedly by people who love you but who have decided, at some point before you had any say in the matter, exactly what kind of person you are and what kind of future that person is going to have. And it is about what happens eventually when you stop trying to correct the record and simply build something so undeniable that the record corrects itself. The dinner was on a Saturday evening in early March. But to understand that evening, to understand why I sat at that table for as long as I did without saying a word, and why I finally said the thing I said, you have to understand my sister Cressida. And you have to understand the family we grew up in. And you have to understand what both of those things had been doing to me, quietly and without announcement, and with no particular malice, for the better part of a decade. My sister Cressida is 36 years old, 3 years older than me, and she has always been the kind of person who experiences other people's ambiguity as a problem requiring her personal intervention. She likes legibility. She likes categories. She likes people to perform their lives in ways that she can evaluate using the frameworks she has developed for evaluation, and when people fail to do that, when they live in ways that resist easy measurement, she interprets the resistance itself as evidence of a problem. When I was 22 and she was 25, she had already decided what category I occupied, the younger one who hadn't figured it out yet, the one who needed guidance, the one who made choices that required explanation and probably revision. She was not unkind about it. She was, in her way, genuinely trying to help. But there is a particular kind of help that operates by first deciding you need it, and that kind of help over years becomes its own form of diminishment. The problem, hers, not mine, was that I kept not fitting the category as cleanly as she needed me to. I am a landscape architect. Not the residential kind, not the kind that designs gardens and patios and private outdoor spaces for people with money and specific tastes. I work in large-scale ecological restoration, the kind of practice that involves returning degraded land to functional ecosystems, designing green infrastructure for cities managing stormwater and urban heat, rebuilding wetland and riparian systems that have been destroyed by agriculture or development over the previous century. It is slow work. A single project from initial commission to final site handover can take 3, 4, sometimes 5 years. The contracts are large and infrequent. The income between phases is uneven in a way that, viewed from the outside without context, looks very much like a person struggling. Cressida views most things from the outside, without context. She is a senior loan officer at a regional bank. She has a salary. She has benefits, a retirement account, and a defined contribution plan that she rebalances every quarter. She bought a house when she was 29 and refinanced it at a better rate when she was 32, and she can tell you, at any moment you ask, what her net worth is to within a few $100s. She is genuinely skilled at what she does. She built something real, and she built it methodically, and I have never pretended otherwise. But she has spent the last decade measuring everything around her, including me and including my choices, against the metrics that make sense in her professional world, and I do not perform well on those metrics in the short term, and she has never developed the patience or the curiosity to look at the longer arc. My parents are Gerald and Miriam Marsh. My father spent 31 years as a high school vice principal and is now retired and spends his time on woodworking projects in the garage and following local politics with the attentiveness of someone who no longer has to manage anything. My mother ran a small alterations and tailoring business from our house for 20 years, mostly referral work from the neighborhood, steady and modest and sufficient. They are practical, careful, loving people who built a practical and careful life and who wanted genuinely for their daughters to build something similarly stable. When Cressida built something recognizable to them, the the salary, the house, the quarterly retirement account rebalancing. They saw it and felt the particular relief of parents who recognize what success looks like because it looks like what they know. When I built something that didn't translate easily into those terms, they worried. They were not wrong to worry, exactly. The early years were genuinely lean. But the worry calcified into an assumption, and the assumption stopped being updated. And by the time my practice was doing work that would have reassured them completely, I had stopped offering them the information. I had stopped offering it because of what happened when I did. The first time I tried to explain a project at a family dinner, I was 26. I had just been brought on as a junior designer on a creek restoration project for a county parks department, my first significant professional engagement after 2 years of smaller work. It was a real project, substantial in scope, genuinely exciting to me, and I made the mistake of trying to convey that excitement at my parents' dining room table on a Sunday in October 2015. I talked about the ecological goals, about the hydrology work, about what it meant to return a degraded waterway to something close to its pre-agricultural state. I watched my mother's face while I talked. I watched her do the calculation, comparing what I was describing to what success was supposed to look like, and come up with an answer that did not match the one I was hoping for. She said, "That sounds very interesting. Is it a permanent position?" It was not a permanent position. It was a project-based engagement, as most of my work would be. I explained that. She nodded in the way she nods when she is filing something under concern rather than under reassurance. My father asked if there was a possibility it could become permanent. Cressida said she had heard that environmental design was very competitive and asked if I had thought about whether there might be more stable options in related fields. I said I was happy with the direction I was going. The conversation moved on. I drove home that evening and sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment building for about 12 minutes and felt something shift in me. Not dramatically, not in a way I could have articulated clearly at the time, but a small and permanent shift in the architecture of what I was willing to offer in those rooms. Not out of bitterness. Out of a kind of tired pragmatism. The gap between what I had to give and what they were able to receive was wide enough that crossing it repeatedly was costing me more than it was worth, and I was going to need that energy for the work. So I stopped crossing it. I showed up to dinners. I asked about Cressida's refinancing and my father's woodworking and my mother's neighbor's situation and whoever else needed discussing. I ate and helped with the dishes and drove home and said nothing about the projects, which were, during those years, slowly and methodically becoming something real. In January 2020, I was approached by Director Fiona Adeyemi, a senior project manager at a regional land conservation organization called the Halcyon Conservancy. She had visited a wetland restoration project I completed in the spring of 2019, a 12-acre system that had been drained for agricultural use in the 1940s and that my team had returned, over the course of 17 months, to functional marsh habitat, including native plant reestablishment, water table management, and a public trail system integrated into the ecological design. Director Adeyemi called my office on January 7, 2020, at 10:14 a.m. I remember the time because I had been at my desk since 7:30 that morning working on a planting specification for a concurrent smaller project, and her call came in while I was cross-referencing 2 documents, and I set them both down to take it. She told me the Conservancy had acquired a 340-acre parcel in the river basin, former industrial land, heavily contaminated, drainage systems destroyed, soil structure compromised by decades of heavy use. The restoration potential was significant, but the work required would be extensive. She was looking for a lead designer for a multi-phase engagement projected to run 4 to 4.5 years. The scope would include ecological restoration across the full parcel, design of public access and interpretive infrastructure, and development of a long-term community stewardship framework. It was the largest and most complex commission I had been approached about in my career to that point. We met in person on January 14th at the Conservancy's offices. She showed me the parcel maps and the preliminary site assessment. I asked questions for 2 hours. I drove out to the site the following week, on January 21st, and walked it for most of a cold afternoon with my notebook and my camera, and I understood by the time I got back to my car, at 4:38 p.m., that I was going to do everything I could to get this project. I spent the following 3 months developing the proposal. I contacted two collaborators I had worked with on previous projects, Dr. Priya Sundaram, an ecologist whose specialty was native plant community restoration in post-industrial landscapes, and Marcus Okafor, a civil engineer whose firm had developed a particular methodology for permeable surface design that I knew would be important for the site's drainage rehabilitation. We worked on the proposal through February and March and into April, meeting twice a week, usually in the evenings because all three of us had other projects running concurrently. I submitted the completed proposal to the Conservancy on April 17, 2020, at 11:52 a.m. They came back with detailed questions in June. We revised through July and resubmitted in August. There was a period in September and October when I heard nothing and did not ask because I had learned that following up in that kind of silence usually produces only anxiety and rarely produces information. I worked on other things. I invoiced a completed repair and buffer project for a municipal watershed authority. I started preliminary design work on a small urban meadow installation for a community land trust in the city. I paid my rent, which was $1,247 per month, and my studio lease, which was $680, and I kept the books balanced, and I waited. On November 4, 2020, at 3:47 p.m., Director Adeyemi called to tell me the Conservancy's board had voted to approve the engagement at its meeting that morning. The total contract value across all 4 phases was $1.4 million. Phase 1 alone was valued at $387,000, with work beginning in January 2021 and an expected completion of September that year. I called Dr. Sundaram at 4:02 p.m. She said something I cannot fully reproduce here, but that communicated genuine delight in about 4 syllables. I called Marcus Okafor at 4:11 p.m. Then I sat at my desk, the same desk I had been sitting at since 7:30 a.m. that morning, and I put my hands flat on the surface, and I let the size of it arrive. I gave myself 11 minutes. Then I opened a new project file and started the Phase 1 timeline. I did not call my parents. I did not call Cressida. I already knew what would happen if I did. I already knew the shape of the conversation, the cautious questions, the request for reassurance that this was stable, the implicit comparison to other forms of income that my family found more legible. I was not willing to let the first conversation about this project be that conversation. So I kept it, and I kept keeping it, and the months passed, and the work deepened, and I kept it still. Phase 1 of the Conservancy project ran from January 2021 through September of that year. It was the most demanding sustained work I had done in my professional life to that point: site preparation, soil remediation oversight, initial hydrological interventions, the first round of native plant establishment across 40 acres of the parcel. Dr. Sundaram was on site 3 days a week through the planting season. Marcus Okafor's team completed the drainage rehabilitation in the north section by July. I was driving to the site 4 days a week through most of the spring and summer. An hour and 40 minutes each way, leaving my apartment at 6:15 a.m. and returning after dark. I was doing the best work of my career, and I was doing it in complete invisibility, as far as my family was concerned. Cressida called me in March 2022. I was driving home from a Phase 2 site visit, the car speakers picking up her voice at 5:38 p.m. on a Tuesday. She said she had been thinking about me, and she was a little worried. She said she had a friend at her bank who worked in commercial real estate development, and that there might be opportunities in that area that offered more stability, and that it might be worth a conversation just to explore. She said she wasn't trying to be negative. She said she just cared. I said I appreciated it. My voice was level and my hands were on the wheel, and I watched the highway, and I said nothing else. She said we should get dinner soon. I said yes, we should. We hung up. I drove the rest of the way home in the dark and did not call her back. In September 2022, a landscape architecture journalist named Hadley Cross contacted me about a feature she was writing for a national trade publication on emerging practices in ecological restoration. She had found the Conservancy project through a presentation Dr. Sundaram had given at a regional conference in May. Hadley and I spoke for 2 hours and 20 minutes on September 19th. She asked detailed questions about the methodology, the community stewardship framework, the site's transformation from Phase 1 to Phase 2. She sent a photographer to the site in October. The feature published in the November issue, 4 pages, site photography across a full spread, my name in the subheading beneath the headline. I bought 3 copies at a newsstand on the morning the issue appeared. I kept one. I gave one to Dr. Sundram. I put one flat in a drawer in my desk and left it there. I did not send a copy to my family. In January 2023, Director Adeyemi called me again. The Conservancy had been approached by a separate land trust operating in the eastern part of the state, a 90-acre parcel, former agricultural land with significant native grassland restoration potential, single-phase engagement. The trust had asked the Conservancy for a recommendation. Director Adeyemi had recommended my practice specifically and had asked if I wanted to be introduced. I said yes. I met with the Eastern Land Trust's Project Committee on February 8, 2023, at 10 a.m. We negotiated terms through February. Their attorney, Patricia Vane, circulated the first draft contract on February 21st. We exchanged 2 rounds of revisions. The final contract was signed on March 3, 2023, at 2:14 p.m. Contract value, $487,000 over 18 months. I sent Dr. Sundram a text at 2:19 p.m. that said, "Signed." She sent back a single word that I will not reproduce here, but that expressed the appropriate sentiment with considerable efficiency. 3 days later, on the evening of March 6th, my sister called a family dinner. Before I tell you what happened at that table, I want to stop for a moment and ask you something. Tell me what the weather is like where you are right now. Is it raining? Is it that particular kind of cold that settles into a room even when the heat is on? I ask because I remember the weather on the drive to my parent house that evening with unusual precision. Overcast, 38 degrees, the kind of late winter damp that makes the inside of a car feel more enclosed than usual. I remember it because I sat in my car in their driveway for 4 minutes before going inside. I was not anxious, exactly. I was paying attention. I had a feeling about what was coming, the way you sometimes do, and I wanted to arrive at it clearly. The dinner had been arranged through my mother. Cressida had called her on March 4th and said she thought the family should have a check-in. That was the word she used, check-in. My mother called me on March 4th at 7:43 p.m. and said Cressida had suggested a family dinner Saturday and would I come, and she said it in the particular tone she uses when she knows more than she is communicating. I said yes. I arrived at my parents' house at 6:15 p.m. on March 6th. My father had made a pot roast. The table was set with the good placemats, the water glasses that come out for occasions rather than ordinary Tuesdays. Cressida was already there when I arrived, sitting at the far end of the table with a glass of water and her phone face down in front of her. She looked at me when I came in and said hello and smiled in a way that did not reach the parts of her face that relax when she is actually glad to see someone. We ate. The conversation had the careful quality of a room in which everyone knows something is coming and has collectively decided to eat the pot roast first. My father talked about a plumbing project he had been managing in the upstairs bathroom. My mother talked about a neighbor who had recently sold her house. Cressida talked about a procedural change at her bank that had affected her team. I talked about nothing specific because I was watching and I was waiting, and I had learned, over many years in rooms like this one, that patience is almost always the correct posture. At 7:52 p.m. my father pushed back from the table and reached for the stack of plates nearest to him. Cressida put her hand flat on the table. "Before we do that," she said, "I want to say something." My father set the plates back down and looked at her. My mother folded her hands. I looked at Cressida and waited. She had prepared it. I could tell from the first sentence, the structure of it, the even pace, the way she moved from one point to the next without hesitation. She said she had been worried about me for a long time, and she felt the family had been avoiding the subject out of a misplaced politeness, and that she thought that politeness had gone on long enough and wasn't serving anyone, including me. She said she had watched my career for the better part of a decade, and what she observed concerned her. She said she saw a business model that didn't scale, a professional field with limited income stability at the independent level, and a pattern of choices that had resulted, as far as she could determine, in no meaningful accumulated assets, no property, no retirement savings of any substance, no visible evidence of professional advancement. Then she looked at me and then at my parents and she said, She is nothing. She's been lying to all of us for years about how things are going. And I think we need to stop pretending otherwise and have an honest conversation." My mother made a small sound. My father looked at the center of the table. Neither of them said anything to the contrary. Cressida continued. She talked about my apartment. She had visited it once, 3 years prior, and had cataloged what it communicated about my financial position, and that catalog had not been updated since. She talked about the fact that I never discussed my work in any detail, which she had read as concealment rather than as the careful privacy of someone who has learned that the room is not equipped to receive what she has to offer. She talked about a conversation she'd had at some point with a mutual acquaintance who had mentioned that independent landscape practice was difficult to sustain. She built the case the way she builds things at work, systematically, each point following from the previous one, the whole structure moving toward a conclusion that she had reached well before she sat down at the table and was now presenting as if it were newly arrived at through the evidence. I sat with my hands flat on my thighs. I looked at her while she spoke. I did not look away, and I did not interrupt, and I did not allow my face to do anything that could be read as either concession or preparation for rebuttal. I simply listened. And underneath the listening, in the part of me that was not listening but was feeling, something had gone very quiet, the particular quietness that comes when a thing you have been bracing against for a long time has finally arrived, and can therefore stop being anticipated. She spoke for 6 minutes in total. When she finished, the table was silent. I picked up my phone. I had not planned the moment. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. I had not come to that table with a strategy. I had not sat through dinner waiting for the right pause in which to deploy a prepared response. I had come because my mother asked me to come, and I had intended to listen and absorb and drive home and feel the familiar weight of it and then put it down and go back to work in the morning. But sitting in that chair, listening to my sister close her presentation and watching my parents receive it without objection, something had completed in me. Not dramatically, not with heat. It completed the way a long equation completes, quietly, finally, the last variable resolved. And the resolution was simple. I was not going to absorb this one silently. I opened my email application. I navigated to a message from Patricia Vane, the Eastern Land Trust's attorney, sent on March 3rd at 2:14 p.m. with the subject line, "Executed contract documents. Please retain for your records." The message contained 2 attachments. I opened the first one, the signed contract itself, 23 pages, and I went to page 1, where the engagement summary appears in the standard block format: parties, scope, term, and value. I turned the phone face out and set it in the center of the table. "That's the contract I signed 3 days ago," I said. "You can zoom in on the first page if you want to see the number." Nobody moved for a moment. The phone sat in the center of the table between the water glasses and the serving dish and the good placemats, screen lit, document visible. Then my father leaned forward from his chair and looked at the screen. The number was on the first page in the summary block, the way contract values always are. $487,000. 18-month engagement. My name at the top of the document under the heading party of the first part, and below it the name of my practice, Marsh Ecological Design. My father read it. He looked up at me. He looked back down at the screen. He said, very quietly, $487,000. I said, "Yes." He said, "For one project." I said, "Yes." 18 months. The Conservancy project I've been leading for the past 2 years is a $1.4 million engagement across 4 phases. Phase 3 completes in August. My mother said my name. Just my name, nothing else after it. She said it the way you say a word you have been mispronouncing for years and have just heard pronounced correctly for the first time. Cressida had not moved. She was looking at the phone on the table, and her face was doing the work of a mind that is processing a significant discrepancy between its model and the available data. Her mouth was slightly open. Not dramatically. Just the small involuntary gap of a person whose next sentence has not yet caught up with what her eyes are reading. I did not elaborate. I did not inventory the decade of work that had produced that contract. I did not describe the Conservancy project or the journal feature or the site visits or the 17-month wetland restoration that had caught Director Adiemi's attention in the first place. I had said the true thing, and I had placed it in the center of the table, and now it was there, and it was sufficient, and anything I added to it would only dilute it. I reached forward and picked up my phone. I locked the screen. I set it face down on the table beside my water glass, and I looked at nothing in particular and waited for the room to reorganize itself around what had just entered it. The silence lasted a long time. Long enough for the candle on the sideboard to audibly shift in its holder. Long enough for my father to clear his throat once, quietly, and then not say anything. Long enough for Cressida to look down at the table, and then look at the window, and then look at me, and then look at the table again. At 8:34 p.m. my father stood up and began clearing the plates. I stood and helped him. My mother brought the serving dishes to the counter. The three of us moved around the kitchen in the ordinary choreography of cleaning up after meal, and the ordinariness of it was its own kind of relief. The way a room that has been holding its breath lets it out through the simple mechanics of people putting dishes in the sink and running the water and finding where the dish towel is. Cressida sat at the table for a long time. At 8:51 p.m., she came to the kitchen doorway and said she was going to head home. She looked at me. She said, "I didn't know." Her voice was even, but the evenness was effortful. The way composure is effortful when what's underneath it is something large and not yet processed. I said, "I know you didn't." We looked at each other for a moment in the particular way of two people who are related and who have just moved through something that has altered the terrain between them and are not yet sure what the new terrain requires of them. She said goodnight. She put on her coat and left through the front door. My mother walked her out. My father and I finished the dishes. I drove home at 9:22 p.m. The temperature had dropped to 31 degrees. I kept the radio off. Cressida called 6 times between 9:47 a.m. and 1:58 p.m. on the following Sunday, March 12th. I was at my studio working on Phase 3 planting specifications, and I let each call go to voicemail and continued working because I was not yet certain what I wanted the next conversation to be, and I did not want to have it accidentally. There were 2 voicemails. The first said she thought we should talk soon. The second was longer. She said she had been thinking about what had happened at dinner all week and that she owed me an apology, a real one, not a procedural one. She said she had spent years building a picture of my life from incomplete information and had mistaken the incompleteness for the full picture, and she thought she had been doing that for a long time and in ways that went beyond the dinner. She said she was sorry. She said it simply and without qualification, and I listened to it twice on a Tuesday morning walk on March 14th. The air still cold, the trees beginning the very earliest suggestion of budding. I called her back on Thursday, March 16th at 11:30 a.m. We talked for 43 minutes. She asked why I had never told them about the conservancy, about the contracts, about the journal feature, about any of it. I told her the truth, which I had not told her before, that I had tried in the early years, and what I received in return had taught me that what I didn't translate into terms the family found reassuring, and that at some point the energy required to keep crossing that gap was more than I had to spare from the work itself, so I had stopped crossing it. She was quiet for a while after that. Then she said she thought that was probably fair, and that she was sorry the family had made that gap. It was not the conversation that repaired everything. Those conversations do not exist. But it was the first conversation between us in many years in which we were both telling the truth at the same time, and that was enough to build on. My mother called on March 9th at 7:14 p.m. and cried a little and said she was proud of me and that she wished she had said it earlier and more often. My father sent a text the following morning at 8:47 a.m. I looked up the Conservancy project online. Found the site photos. Delia, you did that. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my coffee when I read it. I put the phone down. I looked at the window. I gave myself a few minutes with it. Attorney Patricia Vane processed an amendment to the Eastern Land Trust contract in May, a scope extension we negotiated after the initial site assessment revealed a larger area of viable native grassland than the preliminary surveys had indicated. The amendment added $61,500 to the total engagement value and extended the completion timeline by 2 months. She sent the executed amendment documents on June 4th at 4:22 p.m. I signed the acknowledgement and filed it and sat for a moment at my desk with the window open and the early summer coming through it, and I thought about the dinner table in March and the silence that had settled over it when my father leaned forward and read the number on the screen. Some work cannot be explained before it is finished. Some things have to be completed in full before the people watching from outside can understand what they were looking at. That is an uncomfortable way to live. The invisibility of it, the patience it demands, the particular quiet loneliness of knowing something true about yourself that the people who love you cannot yet access. But it is sometimes the only honest way to do the work, and if the work is real, it will eventually become visible on its own terms. The person in your life who is building the case against you is almost always working from the last information they were given. They have made a model, and they're maintaining it, and they are not watching carefully enough to see that you have outgrown it. The most powerful response to that is not an argument. It is a document, signed 3 days before they make their case, sitting in your phone, waiting for the right moment to be placed in the center of the table. If you were in Delia's place, sitting at that table while your sister presented her case against you, would you have done what she did and set the contract down in the center of the table without a word? Or would you have let the evening end, driven home, and continued keeping your work private until you were ready? I chose to show them. On that particular night, in that particular silence, it was the right time. And when I set the phone down and said nothing else, I understood something I had been circling for years, that I had never needed their belief to do the work. I had just needed, finally, to stop needing it,